Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of A Shameless Period. And today, what we will be talking about is uh, PMS. What is PMS? What are the ways in which PMS affects women and also others who experience menstruation? And just within the life cycle of menstruation and however long it is with us, how you see the evolution of PMS and how it kind of features in each one of us. So, what exactly is PMS? PMS stands for Premenstrual Syndrome. Okay, so that means it's um, a combination of things that happen to women about 4 to 5 days earlier to her period, her menstrual period. So, yeah, so that is what we will be exploring today. And what I'm also going to go into is how our daily dialogue of PMS, affects the way we look at PMS, the way we look at our menstrual health, and also what's the stigma around PMS, the issues, some very, very integral core um, issues within the fields of research around menstrual health, around women's reproductive health, and things that accompanies these things. So you're looking at PMS as a really large part, or mm, which plays quite a big role in our lives. It's also something that, I think it's really talked about. It's actually one of the few things that people are willing to talk about. You have the jokes, that's going on, and you the one a line that often irks me, and I'm pretty sure it irks a lot of other women is, "Are you PMSing? Is this why you're cranky?" And oh, is it getting to that time of the month? And you kind of notice that when these lines start appearing in conversation, it means somebody's noticing something about your mood. It hints that people are not entirely comfortable with what a woman is saying at that point of time or the way she's behaving. And then there's this comment that kind of makes its appearance. Oh, is it that time of the month? Are you PMSing? Um, and yeah, and I think to an extent, women have also internalized this dialogue. And I want to actually explore some of that, explore and undo certain kinds of thinking towards PMS. Um, but yeah, so let's just gain a better understanding what is PMS, how it affects us. Um, and so this is part one of PMS. There's part two. So in part one, I'm going to be mostly dealing with what it is and the issues around research. In part two, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into uh, accompanying issues from PMS. And there is something called PMDD, which is called premenstrual dysmorphic disorder. And I really want to give PMDD quite a bit of space, which is why I don't want to cram it up in this session. And it was also a request by a friend of mine to cover PMDD, because it is not really known. First of all, menstrual health is not spoken about. And then to actually expect people to understand what PMDD is, I want there to be a proper space for that to happen. And then we'll also discuss period management, sorry, PMS management in part two. So PMDD and period management, PMS management part will be in part two. Oh, I'm a little uh, fumbling the words a bit. Okay, so just to get a better understanding, I think it would be really good to go down, memory lane and get a little bit of a historical background around when PMS first was published in research, which I think is really important because um, it is really good for us to understand in terms of research how much we've evolved from the first time PMS has officially made its appearance on paper. Yeah. So PMS was initially called premenstrual tension, and it was researched about and published by this endocrinologist called um, Robert Frank in 1931. So we're seeing 1931 as our starting point of when PMS started making its appearance and being more noticeable and being paid some attention to, right? And then, and so this man started noticing that women, in a very cyclical way, have a set of these conditions that they're going through, and which almost seem like anomalies in behavior and anomalies in what they're experiencing just before their menstrual period. And so he kind of started exploring that a bit. And then in his exploration, he found that estrogen started, fluctuations in the level of estrogen may be responsible for these changes that occur just before the menstrual period. So that is 1931. And then you go into 1953. So we're still in premenstrual tension. And this is also around the time where it was categorized by irritability, depression, and sadness. Okay, so that were the main features in what this person observed, along with other physiological symptoms. But then in 1953, you had two other researchers, one lady by the name Catherine Dalton and um, and Raymond Green in 1953 published papers to and they were the ones who changed it from premenstrual tension to premenstrual syndrome, and from then on it's been called PMS. And Dalton and Green in 1953 were the ones who first proved and kind of added an element of confirmation um, about Robert Frank's paper in 1931, about the role of estrogen kind of playing a role in this. And then they went a little further and said that even progesterone seems to be playing fluctuations in the level of progesterone seems to be playing a role in these symptoms. So that is how they came to the understanding that the reproductive hormones were involved in the role played in PMS. So that is a little bit of a story of how PMS came into being. And it is after that you find that Dalton and Green were the ones who really went ahead and put the spotlight on PMS and started making PMS a lot more noticeable to the scientific community. This becomes important a little later in the talk, right? So let's just go into what is PMS. So PMS is a set of conditions and set of experiences that a menstruating person goes through uh, after ovulation takes place. So ovulation is the release of the egg, and it is the optimal time for fertilization. So after this time, you have this window between the ovulation and the menstrual period taking place, and this is when PMS occurs, right? So PMS is expected to be because there is a fluctuation of estrogen and progesterone levels after ovulation in case the egg is not fertilized and there's no baby coming out of that. So which is in majority of women who are not really looking to have children, or who are just not aiming to get pregnant. So yeah, so that is where you see that after ovulation and the hormones start decreasing quite dramatically, that is when you start seeing these changes. So let's go a little bit into what these changes are seen as in women, right? So yeah, so now you have a lot of physical symptoms, but physical symptoms that do affect a woman, but the real uh, the real thing about it, where it becomes quite hard to standardize the experience of it, is because is the emotional experience of it. And so PMS can feature in a really mild way right up to a very severe way within women. And you find that it's about 3 in 4 women, research shows, can experience PMS at some points of time in their menstruating lives. Yeah. So it plays a huge role. That means 3 out of 4, which is roughly, about 90% of women are said to experience this at some point of time, and in varying degrees. So mild, maybe you find the irritation and you find that maybe there's discomfort just before your period, to moderate, where you're having stronger experiences of nausea and disorientation, to very severe manifestations of it, where you find that it is really mentally affecting your functioning as well as physically, and can result in some very serious psychiatric distress and psychological distress. Yeah. So there are some real serious implications to PMS, and it needs to be taken a lot more seriously. Yeah. So some of the symptoms that you see are the physical symptoms are, you find that tender breasts are a real, they really signify that the period is coming, and so they can be tender or and also swollen, and you find that any kind of movement is really uncomfortable at this time. Okay, so wearing a bra is very useful and also integral, and it doesn't matter how big like the size of your breasts, and it doesn't matter, the pain can be quite intolerable and very uncomfortable, and really inconvenience a person. So yeah, so then you again have constipation and diarrhea, and you also have bloating and gassiness, you have cramping, you have headaches, migraines, and even backaches, low tolerance to noise and light. It almost sounds as if you are having, all the features of the menstrual period, other than the period itself, kind of kicking off during these 4 to 5 days, even before the period. But it may not, some people may not have it as severely, but some people may have it quite severely. And then you have the emotional side of things, or the mental health aspects of manifestations of PMS, which is real fluctuation in mood swings. And then you have irritability and hostility. Uh, you have feelings of quite a bit of fatigue and sleep problems. So you're having irregular sleep, you're having disturbed sleep, you're having insomnia, or maybe as a consequence of the kind of fatigue you're experiencing, you're also oversleeping. So it really is on the entire spectrum, but you're looking at fluctuations in sleep. Then you also begin to have appetite changes, and also because of the role of progesterone, which I was earlier saying talking about in the previous episode. Progesterone starts progesterone is the pregnancy maintaining hormone, so it's really in charge of um, your nutrition as well. And you find that you have cravings, you begin to have some cravings which are quite similar to pregnancy cravings. And some pregnancy cravings can be really bizarre, but it's for some reason it's what the body wants. And you have a similar experience of this where it's really specific at times. Or you'll find an appetite change where you're looking for a certain kind of food, or you're just not able to tolerate the very healthy foods that you're normally having on the other days. And you kind of have to break diet, you have to have your cheat days at this time. So this is an appetite change that you're looking at. And it's just it's a kind of preamble to the menstrual period. Yeah. Then this is something I've personally faced and had a lot of trouble with, is trouble focusing, concentrating, and with my memory. And it's almost like disorientation, where I just won't be able to get my thoughts together. And it's bizarre how it happens, but it's like one day I'm very organized, and then the other days, uh, especially the PMS days, I had this real strange sense of, it almost feels like a dissociative state, where I'm kind of floating, just making sure I can get myself to a place, um, do the bare minimum on some level, make sure that, okay, I can get my notes in, I hold my sessions. And it really helps to know whether I'm in the PMS zone or not, because if I'm in the PMS zone, I automatically start feeling, okay, I have to start managing my memory, and managing my focus. So yeah, so that's a very interesting thing that I notice about PMS. And then another thing is clumsiness. And I know it seems really weird to explain it, but it's like all sense of balance seems to be affected at this time. And I've personally faced it as well, where I'm dropping things a lot more, and I'm not as graceful in my movement, and I'm tripping up. And so it's quite interesting and bizarre, but at the same time, it's also inconvenient because I'm clanging around in the kitchen, or I'm dropping stuff wherever I go. Also, really have to keep an eye on my cards, if it's my ID card, if it's my bank cards, all of those things. So these are very reality based things that I have to look at, because I also know clumsiness is part of it, and I've noticed it, and others have noticed it as well in me, and they're like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine. No, no, no. It's just And then I just clock in that, okay, it might be my time of the month that's coming up, right? Then somehow there's this sense of um sadness. You may have crying spells, um, just these random bouts of depression, or these traits of depression that suddenly kind of take over. It might be a small trigger that may incite a relatively big reaction to it, in terms of tears, or somehow you're having a memory just come in, and and you just need to cry, or you may not even know why you're crying or why you're distressed. And yeah, so that kind of happens. And it's a very clouded experience. Then there's also a sense of tension and anxiety in some people, like just a generalized anxious feeling. There's that meme which says, anxiety says something is wrong, and me says, "Oh, can you tell me what's wrong?" And it says something is wrong. So it's really something like that. Is that it's really vague. There's the feeling that to be on edge. And yeah, and then a big part of this is a lost in interest in sex. And so you're looking at libidinal energy being lowered at this time. And this can be a point of an opportunity for conversation and understanding, or it may give rise to conflict if that understanding is not there. So, in the sense, if you're trying to initiate sex with your partner and it's really coming to this point, or and stress kind of exacerbates PMS. Okay, so if there's anything stressful going on and PMS is also the time it's coinciding with, then sex can actually be a not so welcomed idea. And if at that point of time a partner is not, you know of course you have your own stresses and you're trying to initiate sex and you're trying to understand what's going on, and this person is kind of withdrawing, being moody, whatever that is, it can either you can talk about it, and if there's awareness about PMS and if there's an opportunity to explore, okay, what is going on here, is there anything stressing you out, if is it PMS, what is it, and kind of respecting that need for space and the needs of the person, which can be quite ambiguous at this point of time. So it's really understanding and respecting that boundary, because when at this time it may not even it's not a welcomed idea, and this is not for everybody, but for a person who experiences PMS quite intensely, the thought of sex might actually be distasteful. Yeah. And that could bring up a lot of tension within a relationship as well. So yeah, so these are the symptoms, in symptoms and the way it manifests within anybody who's menstruating and going through these hormonal fluctuations. Um, but at the same time, what we have to really keep in mind is that because there are symptoms like this, there's also this tendency to discount either the woman, or the woman discounts themselves and sees their reactions as overreactions, sees their distress as something to put down and just feel bad about. And I'd really like to explore that and address that in today's session. But just a few more features about what PMS is and how it affects us is that PMS actually intensifies with age. So you find that any menstruating person with 30 years of age and 40 years of age may actually have a really a much louder and a more intense experience of PMS, that, and if they've already had an experience of PMS, it might worsen at this point. And you find that that is because when you're starting to go and more towards menopause, you find that the fluctuations within the hormones are believed to be a lot more erratic. And so the kind of experience you have of that fluctuation may also be equally intense in terms of your physiological experience of it as well as your emotional experience of things. So it's just something to prepare yourself about. Um, yeah, prepare yourself with, if PMS is something that you really do, struggle with, and it plays a part in your life. Because, things like bloating and diarrhea, all of that stuff it's inconvenient. And, it really, it, it becomes, it interferes with your functioning in your daily life. And this is something I feel like the more you get educated about, the you're in a better position to do something about it. So yeah, um, yeah, that is about PMS, and then you have PMS also doing something to existing conditions or other health conditions that a person may have. So, and you may also experience this at the beginning, when you're entering teenage, when you're entering when you're entering the menstrual period and puberty and things like that, you find that certain experiences you may have uh, may actually go at an all-time high, and they just hit a crescendo, so that crescendo is um, it can be a result of the PMS. And if this happen, if so, there are two things that can happen at the time of puberty. Is an existing condition may actually hit a really high pinnacle point, and then uh, kind of neutralize, and you may actually find that your body has adapted and may get over this condition that you have, or it may set you up for a cyclical experience of an exacerbated condition, or a more extreme version of that condition just before you enter your menstrual period. So certain things that are affected by this is you have your depression and anxiety, which may start peaking. And depression and anxiety also, you see that during puberty, because of the regulation of hormones in general, you find that it is quite a stormy time. But if you are a person who does suffer from traits of depression, traits of anxiety, even after puberty, and because of your own whatever social triggers you've had, or if there was a bereavement, or maybe even some biological triggers, then when you're approaching your menstrual period, you may find that this experience of depression and anxiety may be heightened at varying levels, and some of them may lead to premenstrual dysmorphic disorder, which can be really severe because it can, uh, PMDD is the shortened acronym for it. And you find that there are certain people who are susceptible to suicidal thoughts and ideation and really severe mental distress. So, yes, which is why I want to give it more space. Yeah, then you have something called chronic fatigue syndrome. You find that maybe you're a person who generally has low blood pressure as a body type, or you're really struggling with processing of iron in your body. And chronic fatigue syndrome can affect some people, and then it just exacerbates as a part of PMS. And so you find these people are also having a real difficulty functioning, waking up in the morning, getting yourself out of bed. And then if you're a working person, or if you're a school going kid, this really, is a spanner in the cogs, because one is your attendance, your education gets affected. Then you may, when you're going to work, you're either struggling at work to complete something that you normally would be able to complete rather quickly, or it may be quite extreme and you can't even leave the house, and then you're getting pulled up for it at work, right? Uh, and when you're a really good worker and something like this you cannot help happening to you begins to affect you, then it's affecting your lifestyle, and that can again affect your mental health, and it affects your financial abilities, and then your ability to get a job. So lifestyle wise, and just leading a relatively comfortable life becomes a lot more challenging because of things like this. Then another thing that gets really triggered is IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome, which is again said to have its origins and its source and trigger within stress. And IBS is something that, it means irritable bowel syndrome. Within the name itself, you know that it's an irritated digestive system, and it's quite a unpredictable experience. And I've heard people have a very stressful time with it. And again, that it eats into that cycle of anxiety and being on edge, because you don't know how your system is going to react to this stuff. Yeah. And then there's something called bladder pain syndrome, which I did not know about, but from my understanding, there is a large portion of women who suffer from bladder pain syndrome and bladder incontinence, uh, which is something that is not really well researched enough for that kind of, for our awareness, generalized awareness. And bladder pain syndrome, uh, people with the syndrome can lead to cramps even before even your before your menstrual period. Other things that really also get affected is asthma. If you have migraines, uh, all of this may hit a peak during this time. Your asthma may be a lot more vicious than usual. Your migraines may be a lot more frequent. Your susceptibility to migraines, if it's stress related migraines, then you really have to watch out for that. Um, and you may also have the experience of seizures more frequently before your menstrual period if you're a person who already has a condition around seizures and epilepsy. And then you also have vertigo. Vertigo again is to do with balance. So your perception of heights, um, and just your ability to stand, walk, all of these things require balance. They're vestibular functions, right? So all of this gets affected. So if you've already had vertigo, then you may have a lot of giddiness, and you may actually faint, and this can be really dangerous. Because I remember I was with a person, luckily I was with her, but when we were crossing the road, she started feeling really giddy, um, while we were crossing the road. And if I wasn't there to hold her, then something quite dangerous could have happened. So, it can really hit you at some point, and at a very inconvenient stage. And you're not doing this on purpose. So you don't have the sense of control, and being in charge of these things um, sets you back, you know. And the last thing that really sees a flare up is arthritis. So anybody with arthritis, very severe arthritis, before your menstrual period, you if suffering from a intense experience of PMS, can experience a lot of pain and discomfort. And the thing is, this is month after month after month, so it's quite frequent. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that accompany PMS. And another thing that happens as well is, you find that there are prostaglandins also being secreted by your uterus. And that, again, if you were there in the previous session, prostaglandins are these things that induce cramps. And they also, I recently found out, play a major role in the experience of nausea as well as diarrhea, apart from very painful cramps. So, and this prostaglandins is found in red meat. So you're looking at nausea, diarrhea, and cramps before your period, during PMS, and during your period as well. So your consumption of red meat may actually affect um, may actually affect you at this time, and be giving you a harder time than you deserve. Or, you know, nobody deserves this. So, yeah, so that brings me to the end of that segment of what is PMS and how does it manifest, and what are the things that accompany PMS, health wise, generally health wise. And it's a pretty raw deal, especially if it's more on the moderate to the severe side, because it has psychiatric implications, it has psychological consequences, as well as life-bearing consequences. Because it is found that Sylvia Plath, who's a famous poet, actually could have been suffering from PMDD, which is a premenstrual dysmorphic disorder, which is a really severe version of PMS. So, yeah, so, it has life and death involved for some people. About 8 to 9% of people suffer from PMDD. And we're going to go into research now, and we're going to see how our attitudes in research affect women, and affect anybody who's menstruating. So, yeah, so you already find that in 1931 when and 1953 when there was some sort of attention being given to PMS. You also find at this point you a really common diagnosis for women was hysteria, right? Which is again a mood based diagnosis for women of, you know, um, which now, of course, hysteria is out because there was a lot of stigma. It was generalizing a lot of things. And now, with research and advancement within the psychological fields, you find that hysteria has made its way out. And there are more specific and tailor made diagnoses for several conditions, which kind of came under this blanketed diagnosis of hysteria, which often led to women being dismissed for being emotional. Now, this plays a crucial role because hysteria already, what it started setting up for women is that women were irrationally emotional. Okay, and this is, if you see, within the paradigm of masculinity and femininity. The reason I'm saying this is that it really goes into how we view research. So, the way we view masculinity and femininity is that you look at calculations, uh, you look at clinical, cold calculation, scientific thought under the paradigm of masculinity. So, they all seem to be, so even if you're thinking of a doctor and you're thinking of the medical module and you're thinking of science, and you're thinking of this person, who is the person that comes to your mind? What is the gender of the person? Okay, and this is something that is really quite deep rooted within the way we view things. And if that voice in your head of a doctor, of a researcher, of a scientist, of anybody of within a clinical field, if that took on a male persona in your head, then it's quite indicative of, how we categorize these things. And whereas when you look at femininity, and you're looking at artistry, you're looking at colors, you're looking at emotions, and you're looking at wilderness. Whereas in masculinity, what is viewed as is structure, cities, builders, architecture. So there is an automatic sense of us placing these things within a masculine characteristic and a feminine characteristic. And this is where it really affects our viewpoint in within research, right? So now what happened in so you've already find that the person who first started looking at it was a male endocrinologist who was Robert Frank in 1931. Then you have Raymond Green and Katharina Dalton. Again, there is male involvement, but you have to also understand that these people were the ones who were allowed to also be in this field, So anything that was studied under the medical module to kind of gain scientific integrity had to show numbers and had to show scientific demeanor. And the scientific demeanor is generally associated with a very cold calculative structure of these are the scientific facts, and we are going to have biological evidence and physiological evidence of all these things. And when you're looking at it, and then so what started happening with the paradigm of science is that science needed to be something that needed to be that began becoming a validation of somebody's experience, right? If it was scientifically proven, then it truly existed. Okay, so this is how it played into the research, right? If you find right now, a lot of male people were initially in the research field. They still are. But what was also happening is that because of that, you were fighting against, we were fighting against this idea of the irrational female. Okay. And you see that women's pain was often dismissed, and it was often the emotionality within women, even now if you see, is criminalized in a way that it is not useful in science, it is not useful in decision making, it is not useful in um, rather not useful, it is rather harmful, and it is looked at as something to pathologize, okay, something to be made into a disorder. And this is something I even noticed in myself, is that even the use of the word symptoms in PMS and symptoms in menstruation, I was actually wondering what could be another word, and it would be features of, features of premenstrual syndrome, features of a menstrual period. Because the thing is, the minute it comes under symptoms, then what starts happening is you're already looking at it as a disorder, right? And how can you say a person has a disorder when almost every person is going through this? Okay, so it was something that was, even I started noticing that unconsciously this is happening. So this is where the role of an unconscious bias comes in, and there's a very heavy stigmatized unconscious bias that plays a role within feminine reproductive health and feminine reproductive issues and the need for research. It looks like the first of all, we don't have enough research, and this was really interesting to note, is that the studies catered to erectile dysfunction as opposed to menstrual health and premenstrual syndrome was at a ratio of 5:1. Okay, so that means ED is getting 5 times more attention in research and research grants and research investment, uh, as opposed to what menstrual health and premenstrual syndrome and research around these topics are getting. And only 19% of men, it is found, suffer from ED, and over 90% of women suffer, not even suffer, but experience this. And yet, there is just very little attention paid to this. Now, how does this affect research? It could be viewed as, oh, this is another feministic rant, which it is. Oh, yes, it very proudly is a feminist rant on some level, but the reason being, reproductive health and research around women's um, reproductive issues is really being challenged at this point, is because we don't have that much more information from the time it received its attention in 1931. And we've come a long way, right? In terms of technological advancement, we don't really have as many treatments and um, lifestyle solutions to discomforts such as this. All right, which is really important to note, because you're looking at the other 50% of the population, the the other 50% of people who fall within the gender spectrum experiencing menstruation. And there seems to be no major advancement in research from 1931 to where we are now in 2020. Okay, and this is where things get really scary. Things get really scary because when will a person, even if you're a person who has to give money for a research grant, you want proof. Now, if there's already limited research available and somebody wants to research something and they're asking people, okay, I need your money to research this thing, and you're saying you want to know where your money is going and what the results are going to be. So, how are you going to invest in something that has no real prior scientific direction and scientific proof. You want to make sure that your money is being put in the right place within the right directions of research so that something may actually come out of it. Now, that is where women's reproductive issues and things around PMS and menstrual health is stuck in a loop. Is that because there's not enough research, because there's not enough existing research, there can't be an advancement of research because people are not willing to invest because there's not enough research already been done to give the research direction, which is a huge, huge problem. Okay, and I would really, if anybody listening to this is out there who's into research and into funding, to really look at, investing more within women's health. And of course, you have a lot more now in femtech and things like that, but there needs to be so much more because the research that even I'm referring to is mostly westernized countries where research funding is available, and a large part of the world is not westernized countries. So we have to start encouraging this kind of dialogue to make sure that more research is done. Because the thing is, what people don't realize is when there's no research being done on these things and there's no improvement to lifestyle to these people, what people do not understand is economically that country would actually not be benefiting. Instead, if you make lifestyle easier, then you're going to have more people working consistently in the workforce. You're going to have the economy actually, you know, growing, and you're going to have employee retention, and you're going to have the generalized health of your employees taken care of, which means that there's more productivity for the company, more productivity for the country. So it has a lot of implications because it's a person's health on the line and it's 50% of these individuals. Okay. So it's so important. Then, other things that were noticed is a sexist bias even within medical trials, because you find even within medical trials for medication, they didn't entirely agree to women because there were more men within medical trials. So you don't have accurate medication to handle these things. Apart from, of course, you have your hormone treatments and you have the pill, which I will be discussing in the next episode. Then there was something called the Yentl syndrome. Okay, the Yentl syndrome was something that was it was a label that was created by this cardiologist whose name is Dr. Healy, Bernadine Healy. Okay, Dr. Bernadine Healy, who was the president of the National Institute of Health in the States, and she was a leading cardiologist, uh, and she was the leader of the NIH from 91 to 93. And she labeled this syndrome as the Yentl syndrome, where women's pain was actually dismissed and completely underestimated. And it was later found that women who face period pain and quite excruciating period pain, the kind of pain that they were facing was almost equivalent to the pain experienced during a heart attack. Okay, and so a heart attack is something that somebody experiences in a one off, but period pains is something that you experience month after month after month. And it is considered as just another consequence of menstrual health and menstrual periods. So, the Yentl syndrome, what it actually found was when one of the research studies that showed that men and women both sitting in the emergency area, men were more likely to get pain medication and attention for their pain within 49 minutes of sitting in the emergency area, whereas women were only likely to get their pain paid attention to and medication for their pain within 65 minutes, an average of 65 minutes waiting for attention. Okay, this already shows a gender discrimination and a gender bias, that people are more ready to listen to a man in pain, and as part of the syndrome of being the irrational woman, the irrational female, there's an entire perspective that women are over exaggerating and they're overreacting and their pain is not taken as seriously, whereas the intensity of the pain that they're experiencing is massive. Okay, and the discomfort they're facing. And it really makes me wonder, these are the same women who are being mums, who are multitasking, who are taking care of parents, who are most likely taking care of husband and a household and a lot of other things, along with just being a working woman. And they may be a teacher, they may be in the health sector, they may be nurses and doctors and in physical labor, and they're managing all of this, going through all this discomfort, because they have to make sure that they're representing the feminist community, they're representing themselves, and it is actual money and their lifestyle on the line. And so I really feel that there should be so much more attention being paid to this. So it was actually Bernadine Dr. Bernadine Healy, who when she was under when she was the leader of leading the institution of the NIH, she got a lot of studies focusing on women's health and women's reproductive health and generally perception of pain and experience of pain and intensity of pain within women. She really started getting that under the spotlight. And she got people to invest about $639 million into research, and that research produced even more proof that this was something that was really going on, and it was being completely overlooked. And it actually propelled more studies, which led to a $1 billion investment. But that was a while ago. But you still find that at the end of the day, it is still inconclusive of what is the cause of PMS and what is the cause of the fluctuation. Because in most women, it is found that their hormones, the level of the hormones, are normal. And a lot of the studies have come inconclusive. And I remember this one thing that really aggravated me was when I was in university. And there was this one professor who spoke to us. And we were a class of 50, where 45 of us were women and 5 men. And here this man, who considers himself scientific as hell, was pacing up and down, and he told a class of majority women, science has shown that PMS doesn't actually exist. And he told this to a class full of women who experience this on a month-to-month basis. And he seemed very proud of himself that science seemed to disprove something as an experience that a core experience women are going through, a core experience girls are going through, a core experience that stops women from functioning, stops girls from getting their education. And he was very proud of himself that the numbers did not show. But what he did not realize he did, and what many people don't realize what they're doing, especially males in the field of gynecology, is that if you don't experience it, you do not know what it feels like. But just because the science doesn't show the data, and this is to the women out there experiencing it on a month-to-month cyclical basis, just because science has not shown conclusive proof of it, it doesn't mean your experiences are invalid or does not exist. It means science has a lot to catch up with. Science has not found a way to validate your experience, which is already valid. So that means science is behind. It doesn't mean your condition or your discomfort doesn't exist. So I really want people to pay attention to this thing, because it's huge. It's really huge. The way we talk. Now, if you're talking and joking about, oh, is it your time of the month? And if women are underestimating their ability to make a decision because they are going through PMS, this is something I have found in myself, is that my reactions were never irrational. My reactions instead is I had a lower threshold of tolerance to things that I normally would have found disturbing. Hence, I became a lot more vocal at that time and I was a lot more visibly irritated. And I showed my irritation. Or my sadness was something, an existing sadness, but it made its way to the surface because my ability to hold things in and my ability to, you know, my threshold was, a lot lower than usual. So I always tell this is that there's always something properly there. Under that, there is valid reason for those feelings. It's just it doesn't make it irrational, it doesn't make you stupid, it doesn't make you unreasonable. And I feel that people who do believe this are falling within the trap of the conception of the irrational female. And I just hope we can watch that. I hope we can stop ourselves, we can be kinder to ourselves, notice that, okay, maybe this may not be the ideal time for a decision. Notice that this we may not be functioning at our optimal levels. And the people around us, please stop joking around about PMS. Stop, because the thing is, women internalize this. And there are a lot of challenges we're already going through. And just putting across this, is it your time of the month? Is it PMS? The kind of message you're giving out is, I'm not okay with the aggression you're showing towards me. You're not being a nice woman. The thing is, we don't have to be. So, yeah. And on that note, I will end today's session. I hope you really enjoy the session. There is a lot more about gender bias within the field of menstrual health, and there is a lot more to be explored. There are some ridiculous people who make ridiculous assumptions, and some of them are women as well. There is a study one woman said um, about PMS may not exist. And I feel that this is a term I like to use, especially when it comes to things like perception for women, is that that's scientific gaslighting. What my professor did was scientific gaslighting. It is invalidating an experience because they think science has already reached its optimum, and I don't think that's true. Science is there to serve us and help us understand the world. And if 90% of a population, of a community, of a gender is facing something and science has no explanation for it, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. It means science is not advanced and science is the one with the shortcoming. So, yeah, with that, thank you so much for listening. And I hope to see you next week for PMS part 2, where we're going to be exploring more into research, more into PMDD, the awareness around PMDD, and how we can manage PMS better and what are the treatments available for that. So, yes, so thank you so much for watching. Please give me feedback, and you have a really good week. Keep safe and have a great period.